Good evening. With an estimated 35 to 45 million people, the Kurds are the largest ethnic group in the world without a homeland of their own. Almost half of the world's Kurds live in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria. In addition, there are also Kurdish populations living in Armenia and Azerbaijan. And finally, there is an extensive Kurdish diaspora of about 1.5 million people. Most Kurds are Sunni Muslims, but many adhere to other faiths. They have faced a long history of violent oppression and discrimination in the countries they live in, and their attempts to set up an independent state have repeatedly been quashed. After World War I, they were promised their own state, which never materialized. Turkey severely represses its Kurdish minority. A long-running and brutal armed conflict between the Turkish military and Kurdish PKK fighters in the southeast has killed tens of thousands. Recently, the Kurdish Institute of Brussels reported about the use of chemical weapons by Turkey against Kurdistan in the north of Iraq and the northeast of Syria. My guest today is Erik Vranken, spokesperson for the Kurdish Institute of Brussels, and we will talk about the Kurdish problem in the upcoming minutes. Good evening, Mr. Vranken. Thank you for accepting our invitation for an interview and joining us on Artsakh Public Television tonight.
I want to thank everybody from Artsakh TV who gave us this opportunity.
Mr. Vranken, in my introductory speech, I gave some general information about the Kurds, who they are and what they are struggling for. Let's start with Kurdish minority in Turkey and move on with the other Kurdish populated areas. How would you describe the situation regarding Kurds in Turkey today?
Well, if you ask me this question, let me first of all tell you that when you speak about Kurds in Turkey, I have some difficulties with the word minority, because to be quite honest, Kurds official figures from Turkey are mentioning that Kurds make up around 20% of Turkey's population. So in other words, you have about 77 million people living in Turkey, and of them more than 50 million are Kurds, which is quite remarkable. This is not something you can compare with other countries when you refer to a minority or a community in a type of minority situation. Now, however, there is a huge number of Kurds nowadays, and that is recognized also by several observers. They're afraid of recognizing their own identity. So this is due, of course, mainly to a severe political situation of assimilation. So a lot of observers are convinced that there must be more Kurds in Turkey, and some are referring to almost, let's say, about 20 million even. So, and the question, the second part of your question is, okay, where are they, the Kurdish populated areas? So traditionally, they are from the southeast and the east of Anatolia, but you will find also in the northern region of Turkey, there is the northern part where they are living. And especially in the cities, you will find those Kurds that will not call themselves Kurds anymore. And this is, of course, due to the fact that there is an economical situation. If you want to find a job in Istanbul, Ankara, or you want any other large Turkish city, it is not really wise to proclaim yourself as being a Kurd, and certainly not recommended to speak Kurmanji. This is the official Kurdish language. Well, official, it's not official in Turkey, of course. Following the military coup of 1980, the words Kurd, Kurdistan, and so on were officially banned in Turkey. So the Kurdish language is officially prohibited in public and private life, also teaching in school, in education, and so on. So coming back to the core of your question, what is the situation of the Kurds now in Turkey? Well, let me tell you that in terms of Turkish repression against Kurds, unfortunately, not a lot has improved over the recent decennia. Well, quite on the contrary, you have the Erdogan regime, and freedom of speech, freedom of press is severely restricted. Those are things that the last recent times we've seen. The very last Kurdish newspaper, for instance, is called Nevelat, that means in English homeland, has to close the doors in 2018 it was. and which are done by a government decree, for instance. And recent figures proved also that at least now about 64 journalists are imprisoned. And then when it comes to politics, and I will end with, we will have close with your question or as an answer this part. When it comes to politics, it takes a lot of courage indeed to be a member of a Kurdish political party. The political party, the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, HDP, well, President Erdogan is filling the country's prisons really with these type of people, with these politicians, with real and perceived enemies of his regime, and is focusing on his rage on members and supporters of the HDP. So, and now to close, allow me to end with somehow a brief summary of the sad reality and the facts and the figures. The regime of Erdogan removed recently, it already in 2014 from the party HDP about 80 mayors, mayors that have normally the authority of their village and town. And recently in 2019, again, about 50 mayors. So those people are replaced by what they call the Erdogan supporters, alliances. And then you have the arrest and imprisonment of the HDP politicians. Well, in the meanwhile, more than 4,000 chairpersons, deputies, parliamentarians, mayors, and members are imprisoned. So that's a sad reality to end with, in fact, and that answers a little bit the question, I suppose.
So it would be naive for Kurds to speak and claim for cultural rights in Turkey today, wouldn't it?
That's correct. It's like I mentioned previously, it's all about assimilation. You don't have the right in Turkey to say that you're Kurdish, and if you do so, you're going to lose a lot of your, let's say, the rights that you normally have as a civilian. So culturally, to give you examples, a real life example, for instance, is Nudem Durak, a teacher, a female teacher who was also in her free time makes music and sings traditional songs, Kurdish traditional songs. She sung those songs in before the classroom of our children, and is now imprisoned for more than 20 years due to the fact that she's going to be sentenced as some, type of offensive behavior against the Turkish state. Can you imagine? These things are still happening in Turkey currently.
Recently, the Kurdish Institute of Brothers reported about the use of chemical weapons against Kurdistan in the north of Iraq and the northeast of Syria. How is the situation as of now? Do you see any international mechanism to stop the Turkish military operation against the Kurds?
Well, do we see that? You know, Erdogan's governance becomes really recognizable. In fact, what is happening with Erdogan, whenever there is an economic situation in Turkey that declines, it is time to start a war, or what he calls an operation against Kurds at home or abroad. And that seems the most adequate way to distract the people from his governing failures. And the reason are each time the very same. He talks about Turkey fighting against terrorism. Yeah, that's the most easy way to put it, of course. So indeed, Erdogan is meanwhile pursuing campaigns of unprovoked military aggression against Kurds in northeast Syria, West Kurdistan, what you call Rojava, and recently also now in the northern of Iraq, and that's what we call southern Kurdistan. But let me first answer your question and start with Rojava. So when it comes to Rojava, because it's very unfortunate that we obtain very little or no information from the regular press and media. So the Kurdish Institute in Brussels, we have frequent contacts with journalists and NGOs operating in Rojava. And thanks to these contacts, we obtain first-hand information of what, and a very nice view, a good view on what is going on in the region. And to be quite honest, we work closely together also with the Rojava Information Center for moreover. And the Rojava Information Center, they dispose of a website and a huge database that I can surely recommend. If you're looking for detailed information, all the figures and information you find on this website is based on testimonies from journalists, researchers, human rights activists, local people, you name it. So what about Turkey's military operations currently in the northeast of Syria? Well, in 2018, Turkey invaded Afrin, and Afrin is a part of Rojava. It's the most western part. If you have a look on it on the map, this part situated in the west of Rojava is still occupied by Turkish troops and Turkish-backed jihadist militias. Now, ever since the invasion, the local population in Afrin has suffered a lot under this occupation and repression. That's one thing. And then in 2019, a year later, there was the other so-called operation of Turkey against Rojava, and that that was with the consent of Russia and Putin, that Turkey was allowed to occupy a northern part, very ultimate northern part, a strip in the northern part of Rojava. Now that occupation also is very tough for the local people. Why? It has a serious impact on those people. For instance, Turkey has now control over quite some water supplies, and they are able to shut down the water. And that's what they did recently in the recent months already twice. They're really shutting down the water, and which has an enormous impact, of course, on these local people. And yeah, and now coming back on the issue of chemical weapons, on one hand, they put in very efficient drones, and Turkey is known for their very efficient drones to bomb very precise, to have very precise bombing. And on the other hand, when it comes to the use of chemical weapons, yes, and it's something, a call that we indeed launched recently, because it's not only in Rojava, it's now meanwhile also an operation they started since weeks and months, in fact, on the northern part of Iraq, always under the same terms, in the fact that they are fighting against terrorism, but they make use of chemical weapons. And to give you maybe some figures, according to the monthly balance sheet released by the People's Defense Forces, those are the HPG in Syria and Iraq, the invading Turkish army carried out about 164 or something chemical attacks against guerrilla forces in the last month. But in the meanwhile, they're bombing also with chemical weapons remote villages who are at the meantime also victim of these type of attacks. So that is why the Kurdish organizations call on the international community to break the silence about the use of chemical weapons against Kurdish regions. And recently, the Kurdish Institute, effectively of Brussels, together with the European Free Alliance, launched a similar call to the international community.
You mentioned reports about the usage of drones by Turkey against Kurds in Rojava and other places. Turkish drones, also known as Bayraktars, were also largely used by Azerbaijan against Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. How effective do the Kurdish forces resist drone strikes?
This is indeed a very tough issue. It's very difficult, and indeed, without any doubt, the people in Artsakh and during the Azeri war are very conscious of that. It's very difficult to defend yourself against those very efficient type of weapons, and it's they have to deal with it. But it's a very difficult issue because they don't know. Again, if you would say, can the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, can they resist those Turkish aggressions and invasions? Yes, but when it comes to those type of weapons, that is becoming really very tough. It's tough to predict, it's tough to prevent, and it's tough to defend.
Besides conventional warfare, in Syria, Kurdish-led forces have been engaged in a war with the Islamic State. In Iraq, the autonomous Kurdistan region has been in conflict with both Islamic State and with the Iraqi state in its quest for full independence from Iraq. How is the situation with these struggles? Are there any possibilities for Kurdistan to obtain independence from Iraq?
First of all, because there are two parts in your question, let me first talk a little bit, if you allow me to, about the situation with the Islamic State. Maybe you heard about it, but in January 2022, there really was a major incident with ISIS in the city of Artsakh. And in the whole region of Rojava, you have those large prison camps where ISIS has taken full control. In fact, so it's very difficult to even enter these camps. ISIS has really retaken, you could call it, full control of the situation. The Syrian Democratic Forces were able to prevent the incident in Artsakh and to prevent the doors would be opened of the prison for more than 5,000 potential ISIS fighters. That would have been a real disaster. But in the recent year, there were much more of these incidents and fights with Islamic State. So these incidents prove that the situation over there in the autonomous administration of Northeast Syria is a ticking time bomb, and poses a real danger, not only to the region, but in fact also to the entire West, and the West should be conscious of that. So for years, politicians in the autonomous administration of Northeast Syria, but also the Syrian Democratic Council has been pointing out this serious danger. And in a recent released detailed report, they not only describe the global threat, but they also formulate concrete solutions to avoid this crisis. And to be quite honest, one of the solutions would be that the international community and the Western countries recognize the existence of the autonomous administration of Northeast Syria, and that they start with diplomatic relations with this administration. And even by doing so, IS fighters can be brought to justice and can be sentenced in Rojava. That's already one thing. Now, the second part of your question relates to the situation in the north of Iraq, as I already mentioned, with the consent of, because Turkey is a NATO member, and with the consent of NATO, apparently, because they keep silent. That's a silence we wanted to break. Turkey can invade certain parts of northern of Iraq. Now, you have indeed the situation in Iraq where you have the what you call the Kurdistan Regional Government, the KRG. That is the official executive body of the autonomous Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. It has been established in 1992, and now in 2017, the KRG launched maybe you remember the independence referendum to obtain Kurdish independence from Iraq, and more than 90% of the Kurds participated in the referendum, which is indeed remarkable, and voted in favor of independence. Of course, the referendum was considered as illegal by Baghdad, the federal government of Baghdad. And KRG, in fact, respected the ruling of Baghdad. They stated that this decision must become a basis for starting a dialogue, a national dialogue between Kurdish authorities and the Baghdad authorities. So what we have as a situation currently, my answer is that in Iraq, yes, they have what you could call an autonomous recognition, but they don't have what you could call independence. And that, unfortunately, I'm afraid, will never be the case, because you need consent also from Western countries. Take, for instance, the United States, but Russia. None of those countries are agreeing for the fact that Kurdish regional government would become independent. So it's a geopolitical situation also.
Mr. Vranken, the Kurdish diaspora is considered strong and numerous. What role does it play in shedding light on the Kurdish problem in the world and also supporting Kurds on the ground?
Sorry, the last part of your question was difficult to understand. Can you please?
I mean, what role does the diaspora play in the life of Kurds? What's your experience?
Okay, now I see what you mean. Well, that's you see what maybe I should come back with as an answer with what is happening now. Once again, in a geopolitical situation, is there is a quite remarkable Kurdish diaspora in Sweden and Finland, and certainly in Sweden. And yes, as everybody knows now, Sweden and Finland are now potential members of NATO. They asked to become a member, and this is what the Western countries are calling now an historical moment. Well, can you even imagine that in the situation we are now, that Turkey blocks this membership of Sweden and Finland? And the main condition here is that they want the so-called terrorists living in Sweden and Finland to be expelled to Turkey and to be delivered to Turkey. This is incredible. If this is the case, if the international community agrees on this, this is something really something we never seen before. So you have an international situation where Finland, Sweden, and every Western country wants really, and especially the United States, really want to have this membership of these countries. And then you have the Kurdish diaspora, for instance, in those Scandinavian countries, and they need to suffer of this type of situation. So this is really strange. But in fact, Kurdish diaspora is nowadays, when you look at the Western countries, we as what I see in my own country is that we have very, very good contacts with the remainder of the diaspora of the same regions. And I'm referring in particular to the Syrian Christian community, the Armenian community, Yazidi community. So there are quite some, let's say, diaspora working very nice and closely together. And I see this not only in my country, but when I look at other institutes around, neighboring countries, then I see the same situation. I hope this answers a little bit the question you had.
Yes. Mr. Vranken, I thank you very much for your time.
With my pleasure. And thanks you again for inviting.